Most of the advice out there about starting a clothing brand sounds great and it gets a lot of clicks. But unfortunately, a lot of this advice isn't very sustainable or even good. And in some cases, it can be a risk for you and your business to follow without question. And I understand why this advice is out there because it makes starting and running a clothing brand look really easy. Like it's a sure bet for having a successful business. And the truth is, it has never been easier to start a clothing brand. In 2026, you can start a clothing brand really, really easily. But that doesn't mean having a clothing brand and running a successful, profitable brand is easy. And sure, you can design a graphic, get it printed on a blank, launch a website, and bam, technically you are in business. But starting a brand and having a brand that actually lasts are two completely different things. So today in this video, we're going to go through some not so great advice that you're seeing out there on social media about starting a clothing brand, where it actually goes wrong, and how to be more intentional and realistic about your own brand. Number one, you don't need money to start a clothing brand. One of the most common things you'll hear is you really don't need any money to start a clothing brand. I started my clothing brand with $100, blah, blah, blah. And I understand why people say this. It's meant to be encouraging, but it's also very misleading. And you don't need a huge budget to start a clothing brand, but you do need enough to actually build and test a product in the right way. The truth is, sampling costs money, production costs money, and it's all upfront money. And it also takes time. Shipping, packaging, marketing, all of these things cost money, and it adds up fast. And when people try to start from nothing, what usually happens is they underinvest in the parts of the business that actually matter, like sampling. So let me clarify this. It's not about having a lot of money. It's about having enough money to take the right actions for your brand and be intentional about starting and building it in the right way from the ground up. Now, to be fair, processes like dropshipping can definitely lower the upfront costs. But this doesn't solve the bigger problem, which is getting people to actually find out about your brand and buy your products. And unless you already have a large following or something happens to go viral, you're still responsible for marketing, building demand, and creating something people actually care about and want to buy. So let's talk about how to be more realistic about this. Starting small is so smart, and I always give this advice. Your first collection should be tight, even if you have a lot of money, even if you have an investor or a big budget. You want to test before you go big. Don't waste your money. Plan for sampling, plan for production, and plan for inbound shipping, even duties and taxes if you are importing from other countries. Test the product in the market before getting bigger, before growing, and use any revenue from your first collection to reinvest back into your brand and grow slowly and intentionally. Number two, drop shipping is the same as building and designing a line. So this is where a lot of people confuse e-commerce with actually building a clothing brand. And drop shipping gets positioned as an easy way to start, but it's not really brand building, it's a business model. Here's the truth about dropshipping. You don't control the product or the quality or the fit. You're reselling something that already exists with your logo or your graphic on it. And truly, if you don't control the product and the fit, you really don't control the brand. Now, if your goal is to test marketing or have an e-commerce business, this could serve a purpose. And it does for many people. But if your goal is to build a brand with real identity and longevity, it's not the same path. And you're not the only one selling these products when you're drop shipping. There are thousands of other people selling the exact same products with different graphics or logos on them. Yes, you have an edge if you already have a following, but if not, you'll need to think hard about how to market and sell your products. The reality is the competition is so fierce in this space already, and it's just getting more competitive. How to be realistic is if you're going to use dropshipping, use it as a temporary tool in your business. Use it to test your brand and don't use it as the foundation of your brand. Because at some point, you're probably going to want to develop your own products, have your own fit, your own styling, and your own identity. Number three, Alibaba is all you need for sourcing. And I've talked about this a little bit before, but I see this a lot. And to be fair, Alibaba can be a useful tool for sourcing, but it's not a sourcing strategy. It's one platform. And like most directories, it's overcrowded, competitive, and full of middlemen. So if Alibaba is your only approach to sourcing, you're really not researching and building supplier relationships. You're making all of your decisions based on one single source. And that reduces the likelihood of you finding anything that's unique and building real relationships that are sustainable over the years of your brand. So if you want stronger products and better differentiation, you have to go beyond where the masses are going and where the masses are telling you to go, and beyond what is most easily accessible. I always say, be a little bit scrappy, do your own research, think outside of the box, and also check out my video on sourcing smarter beyond Alibaba. And number 4 for not so great advice I see is focusing on revenue alone. I see this everywhere. For example, my brand went from 0 to 500K in just 1 year. And it sounds amazing. Of course it does. It gets attention, it gets clicks, and it makes people think, how did they do it? I can do this. It's so easy. But revenue is only one part of your business, and it doesn't tell the full story. Revenue doesn't show what your costs and your expenses are, what your margins look like, or whether you actually make money. It's just sales. For example, if a brand does $500,000 in sales in a year and their costs are $400,000, that's a very different business than it sounds like on the surface. And if there's no margin, there is nothing left to reinvest, to grow, or sustain the business in the long term. And this is where people get misled. Just because you have sustainable revenue doesn't mean you have a long-term successful profitable business. And I keep saying it. I say it in almost all of my videos because it's not said enough on this platform. You can't just sustain a business on revenue alone without profit. And number 5, just follow trends for inspiration. This is the final worst piece of advice that I'm seeing on social media. And to be clear, trends matter. This is fashion. They matter. But building your brand around them is where things start to go really wrong fast. If you don't have a point of view for your brand in a way that feels authentic to draw inspiration, and inspiration can really come from anywhere, it's probably going to be an issue for your brand in the long term. First of all, there are already a ton of big brands and fast fashion brands that are following trends. That's all they do. And they have teams and resources behind them. So you'd be competing with that if you're just looking at trends. And they're even struggling right now. Secondly, by the time you design, produce, and launch your line and your products, you're already behind because these brands can do it faster and cheaper than you ever could do it. So watch runway shows to gain awareness of the market and what's out there, but don't use trends and what's on the runway to build your brand or your next collection solely on. The brands that last usually aren't chasing trends. They have a more consistent point of view and they become known for something deeper and more meaningful than just trends. Starting a clothing brand isn't easy, and a lot of times it's actually challenging, and it's definitely a long game. And in 2026, there's a lot more competition in this space with print on demand, drop shipping, Shopify, you get it. And this is exactly why having a clear, realistic understanding of the industry and what it takes to actually have a successful clothing brand, which this is why I'm sharing all this stuff with you guys here on this platform. And also having a unique point of view for your brand matters the most in terms of survival and success for your business. For more insights into the fashion industry and small business from someone with 20 plus years of experience, subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.